All right, everyone, welcome back to Inspirational Interviews. We have Courtney Pinkerton back here for another interview. We could probably do 20 million interviews with her. Today, we're specifically discussing Enneagram and perhaps how dosha shows up in alignment with that as well. So I'm excited to have you back, and I was going to read your bio. Do you just want to do a little intro for people that haven't met you, didn't meet you the last time?
Sure, whichever you prefer.
Why don't you just share? What would you like people to know about you?
Okay. Well, I am Courtney Pinkerton. I am a certified Wayfinder coach and an Enneagram mentor. And I am the author of a book that is called The Flourish Formula, an overachiever's guide to slowing down and accomplishing more. And that's kind of what we talked about, this whole life, what I call the life garden of time. I've got my little visual behind me. Those are all my life gardens. We talked about that last time. And this time we're going into this deep, deep love that I have for the Enneagram and exploring how this ancient personality map, which is a sort of archetypal, these 9 different human patterns. Like we see patterns in nature, the rings of a log, or even, the raindrops on the concrete. We can sort of see there's a pattern in the mystery. And so also our human expression, there is a pattern. And what's so beautiful about the Enneagram journey is as we do our Enneagram work, we discover that like the freedom from the pattern, what is us on the deepest plane, our essence, it's always kind of shining through this archetypal pattern, but we can really come to see like what is and what isn't us. So when I was super burned out, my background, I came from nonprofit and kind of direct service world, and have always been interested in leadership and making change and supporting people who are doing that. But then I got really burned out, and that was in my early 30s. And it was really the Enneagram on one hand and coaching, which I just love this part of the story, that it was 2 different friends who paid for me, like one to go to the Enneagram teacher and one to come on this retreat with her coach. And I just feel like there's such, I don't know, just such love in the way I was met in this moment of total vulnerability that then created the roadmap for who I want to be now. And so the Enneagram brings us the deep dive and the kind of like, what are we here for? Why does it matter? What is this time now that we're showing up for? And how can we like pay forward our best gifts? And coaching, I feel like, lands it in something a little more, the scaffolding, so we can take those inspired turtle steps and feel supported in our growth. So, and I live on a tiny farm north of Asheville. We just bought this property, kind of a dream property, last summer. And I've been married to my husband, Rich. We're coming up on our 20th anniversary this fall. We met in the Peace Corps and got married in Nicaragua. And we have 3 children who are all having birthdays, but 12, 14, 15, and 16. That's it.
Yes, a very, very full and inspired life. Yes. We have lots of similarities there.
I'm very excited to talk about Ayurveda because I always talk about it, but I don't know as much about it as you do. So I'm really excited about this curiosity of the 2 together.
Well, and likewise with me with the Enneagram is that I know some, and it's been really helpful for me in some ways, and I'm not an expert at all. So so let's dive in. You were talking before we started recording about the energy centers and how they can inform us in our understanding through the Enneagram. Will you talk about that?
Why, yes, I will. So, and it's interesting, so many of the ancient traditions like Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, the Enneagram, of course, like more recent brain science and like explorations of our neural pathways support what these awarenesses that come from centuries and centuries ago. But with the Enneagram, the way it's described is that we have, as humans, we have 3 centers of intelligence. So there's our head, which is, of course, our intellectual intelligence, our creativity, our inspiration. I like to think with the head center also about the beautiful way we can like cross-pollinate. So like ideas build on ideas, build on ideas. The heart center of intelligence, which is, of course, this relational field and loving kindness and compassion and these virtues of human expression that are through this heart plane. And of course, physiologically too, like the electromagnetic field of the heart and the way that that influences and we, connect to each other physically as well. And then there is the gut or the body center. And we kind of use those words synonymously because the way I think about it, it's like the gut is sort of the clearinghouse for all the body sensations, and the nervous system and the kind of intelligence that lives, that lives in our gut. And our language is, of course, full of the sense of like, oh, I had a gut sense of things. So the idea is that we all have all 3 centers of intelligence. Culturally, in the dominant culture in the United States, especially, but I think in much of Western Europe, and we've exported, and much of the Western world, including Europe, and then of course that's been exported to lots of places around the world. Historically, we prioritize the mind as almost exclusively the center of intelligence. A lot of times women have some very serious emotional intelligence skills, and that's less valued, but I think it's growing to be appreciated. And then the body is also, I think, in a kind of renaissance where people are coming to appreciate, okay, the body wisdom is actually really vital. And so the idea is that because of our Enneagram type pattern, we have one of these centers that we're going to like lean on a little too much. Maybe it's like we're comfortable there and we go a little too much there. It's like a filter. It helps us function, but it's like it takes reality from this wide open experience to 1/9. And so because of our type pattern, we're going to over lean on one of these, but we also underutilize another. So as we bring the 3 into a kind of like they're all online inside us as resources, then we have more capacity to enjoy our life, to contribute our gifts, and to feel more resourced. So it's a journey, but it gives us a bit of a roadmap, which I really appreciate. I think we're on this journey anyway, but it's like, oh, okay, it gives us a bit of a roadmap.
Yeah. So I'm going to chime in with the Ayurvedic perspective.
Yes, you are. Please do.
These 3 centers. So we have the doshas of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So there's three doshas, and these centers also show up in Ayurveda. And so the head is primarily Vata, which some people might think, oh, well, it's Pitta because they have like the analytical mind, but it's more the Vata because it's like outside of the box thinking. It's that connectivity that you were talking about, like connecting the dots. It's feeling emotional intelligence, and the ability to kind of create with the mind is the Vata energy. And Vata energy often cuts off. Vata predominant folks are often very unaware of their bodies. More think about like, sticks with heads on them. And then we have the heart center, which is more of the Kapha center, the feeling, the connectivity of heart, of love, of hugging. And that's more of the Kapha energy. And then the gut, the digestive energy, the assimilation, and that quick responsiveness of like trusting your gut or your gut response is more Pitta. And so
the fire in the belly.
the
Yes.
fire in the belly. Yep. The digestion. And that can be figurative and literal, that digestion. And then there's this other layer with Ayurveda, which is what we call the malas, or the ways in which we sabotage ourselves. And they come back to these centers too. So we have, and I'm looking down at my notes because I was like, I need to refresh my memory here with it. So the head is the Maya Mala, which is, and this is more the Pitta area. So this is changing up the doshas a little bit, how I just described them. But the mind, which is the measuring, the comparing, the judging mind, it creates separation. There's criticism. The judge, the kind of all or nothing thinking. This is Maya Mala. So it will separate us. These are the ways in which we kind of like other ourselves in the world. Then we come to the heart, which is the Anava Mala, and the way that we create this imbalance here is the Vada tendency, which is to tell ourselves that we're alone in the world, that nobody else, we're different from everybody else. So we think we're alone, unsupported, isolated, unsafe. There's self-pity, the story no one cares. That's in the heart. And then the imbalance that comes into the gut is Kapha imbalance. And so this shows up as what's called Karma Mala, which is the inability to take action. It's the separation by stagnation, basically.
It's such a good line. Separation by stagnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
So that's another way. So there's kind of like the prakriti and the vikriti, we would say, like the innate wisdom of the area of the body, or
of course, the two sides. Yes. And the easiest way we get off balance, like that's habituated. And I think in the Enneagram world, well, first of all, that was fascinating. And I think I don't know if it's in this call or soon, I feel like we need to I want to like offer myself as a case study, because I feel like I'm a little bit of a mystery of how the Enneagram and the doshas like fit together. But just to kind of speak to the two sides of the coin, and from an Enneagram perspective, we talk about like we have our type pattern, our type structure, and then our essence. And so the essence is that deepest, authentic self. It's our virtues. It's like who our soul is here to be and express. And then our type structure it's not that the type is all bad. It's the same energy. It's just, it's more constricted. Like I've heard it described, whatever center you lead with, or inside like the 9 type pattern, inside the one that's yours, you have the greatest amount of resource and the least amount of freedom, because of that habituated patterning. And so it's learning to recognize our Enneagram type pattern and kind of bring it above the line of consciousness so that we can make a choice and have more freedom. But the idea that it holds both potentials within it, I think and that there are these particular familiar ways that we go from connection to self, to source, and slide into feeling, separated, this illusion of separation in 9 different ways, or in 3 different ways, or anyway. So yes, that was fascinating.
Likewise, fascinating to hear from you too.
I knew we were going to nerd out. I was waiting. I was just waiting.
And we do have several people watching live. So those of you watching live, feel free to chime in the chat too. You can participate in this conversation.
That's always fun.
Yeah. So when we back to the Enneagram perspective, so these energy centers, are there 3 Enneagram types that originate in each of the centers? And will you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There's 3. So it's the 3 centers of intelligence, or the 3 head, heart, and gut. And then within each, those are called triads. So in the head triad, there are 3 types. And in the Enneagram world, we just use numbers to describe the types. So there's types 5, 6, and 7. 5 is the observer. 6 is sometimes called the loyalist or the devil's advocate. And 7 is the epicure, the kind of life of the party. And they're sort of just, they're like, it's like fractals or something. They're three, not quite versions of the same thing, but they have a lot of similarities and some really important distinctions. And then if we move to the heart, and I'm just kind of giving the names, but sometimes people can start to have an impulse. Like when I was going through the my first Enneagram workshop, and it's like a weekend long thing, and she goes deep and like all the numbers, but I kind of knew I was probably a heart type. And she was describing type 2, and I was like, close, but not. And then she gets to type 3 and says, this is the chameleon of the Enneagram. And I was like, uh-oh, I think we found it. So some people have a very intuitive journey. So you may, if you don't know your type, and I can definitely share a ton of free resources and great books to go to identify your type. And I hope we'll do that before we get off. But if you don't know your type, you may, even as I'm just giving the names and describing the energetics, start to be alert to like those little impulses of intuition. So the heart types 2, 3, and 4. Type 2 is the giver or the helper. Type 3 is the achiever, or my preferred name is the organizer. It's a lesser used name, but the kind of go-getters, that kind of energy. And then type 4 is sometimes called the romantic, and it's also like this artist archetype, creative archetype, deep diver. And then the final triad that we haven't talked about is the gut triad. And so that is types 8, 9, and 1. And so 8s are sometimes called the controller. They're this like large and in charge. 9 is the mediator. And 9 is actually at the top of the Enneagram. So they're sometimes called the crown of the Enneagram. So this is a great little kind of quick, my favorite sort of quick book on it. It's called The Visual Enneagram, because it's like a children's book almost. I mean, it has these beautiful descriptions, but it also has these lovely like graphics. So type 9 is at the top of the Enneagram, and that is our mediator, our peacemaker. And we all have all 9 types within us, but type 9s especially like really can access all those points around the Enneagram. And then type 1, which is sometimes called the perfectionist or the moralizer, is the final gut type.
Awesome. So I'm trying to see. Oh, Mary Fran just wrote in and she said, when I heard the description of the Enneagram, I knew immediately that I was a 2. Yeah, so you can often hear. I must say that when I first discovered the Enneagram, I did not self-identify with my ultimate true type.
Which is also a fairly common experience.
Yeah. So that's really interesting that there's these triads and that they reflect different facets of the seat, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to share more about some of the types? Do you want to go into, we could talk about ourselves and
I think we should do that, and we should like help each other. So, and I'm happy to start because I'm so curious. This is I lead with type 3, as I indicated on the Enneagram, which means historically, like, and as I've done my work, it's been a lot of the type 3 archetype is the quintessential kind of doer, human doer, forgetting about being. And also the sad part is like all this achieving and doing, it's coming out of this place of like feeling like we have to earn our keep, like that it's in the shame triad. And that's one of the things I didn't mention. The 3 triads have an emotional underpinning. So for the heart types, shame, or it's also sometimes called grief, is like the under the surface feeling, especially when our type is like running the energetics. For head types, it's some flavor of fear. And for gut types, it's some flavor of anger or frustration. And I feel like if we asked people, just like did a poll, like the 3 things that you don't want to feel, it's like shame, anger, anxiety. Like these are just kind of the 3 biggies. And it's just interesting to me that when we're kind of disconnected from our source, we're kind of participating in one of these three big human emotions.
And can I just insert that those primary emotions are the imbalance of each of the doshas? So
yes, you can insert that.
For kapha, it's shame.
Mm.
For pitta, it's anger. And for vata, it's fear.
Well, there you go. So that's probably the biggest like parallel we've seen. And I mean, how interesting that these systems developed. I mean, the history of the Enneagram is kind of perhaps more spotty, but the 2,000 years ago, like Palestine, northern Egypt, there were communities of people, partly perhaps coming out of the Christian tradition and what we call the desert mothers or fathers. So the kind of proto-monastics, people living in caves, saying like, running away from the Roman Empire and all the extraction and violence, and saying like, we're going to figure out this human nature, and we're going to like sit in a cave until, you know, we are not quite enlightened, but we have some perspective. I just love that kind of origin story. And then it may be kind of like cross-pollinated with the Sufis. So for a lot of years, it was living in the monastic traditions of the kind of Sufi, the like mystic end of Islam, and also within Christianity. And it was kind of like underground. And then it came really out and started becoming so much more dominant and taught about and explored in the 1980s. And it's just like, and it's mushrooming now. And I think I'd heard a couple of years ago, it passed, the Enneagram overshot like the Myers-Briggs for Google searches. So it's like really becoming but I say all that kind of fun history to say, isn't it interesting that humans were going through that in that part of the world, and the evolution of this body of work, which is still very much evolving. It's not done. And then Ayurveda having its own kind of origin story and its own evolution. And yet it's like, to me, it's like the wisdom of generations. And like, thank goodness. And that's why I love the Enneagram. And I'm guessing you feel this way about Ayurveda, is it's like a teacher I can go back to again and again. And I really trust it. And it is a gift from previous generations forward. And I feel like right now, in this moment of tremendous change and transition globally, it's like I feel those arms, you know, I mean, I could almost just feel like emotional about it, just like feel the legacy of the gifts of these traditions. And I think there's a reason they've come to be so much more popular and people are so much more curious about them now. So, okay. So I kind of got off my saying, so I feel like I'm living in a creative tension. So I lead with type 3 Enneagram wise, but I've done quite a lot of work with an Ayurveda practitioner here in Asheville. It's been extremely helpful for me over years. And so my Ayurveda constitution is Pitta Vata, but most of my like symptoms of being in balance are Vata. So that doesn't really, like, in a way, Kapha is the easiest part. Like I sleep really well, you know, I have like thick hair. These are things she told me that's like Kapha-y. That part, which goes to the heart, isn't really where the trouble is. But I think I'm actually answering my own question as I talk about this. Maybe, do you want me to say what just occurred to me, or do you want to? Okay, it's interesting because type 3s are a heart type. However, and as I said, the shame, the grief is under the surface. However, anxiety is actually almost the proto emotion that forms the type structure. So type 3s have a lot of the pursuit of accomplishment and the avoidance of failure is actually motivated out of fear more than anything else. So it's almost like it's the deeper dimension that gives rise. I wonder if Ayurveda speaks more to the depth dimension that gives rise to the type structure, and the Enneagram is more like the thing we're like living in day to day. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah. I was wondering about that because in Ayurveda, we talk about Prakriti and Vikriti, which are these words I mentioned before. And Prakriti is your base constitution, which is set when you're conceived. And it's like your perfect recipe for you being in balance. It doesn't have to do with anybody else of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, right? It's like your your amount of each of those, right? So you can be, pitta predominant, or pitta vata, and then there's the vikriti, which is where you get out of balance, right? So you're saying you get out of balance in vata mostly, but there might be this underlying kapha kind of driving. So we also can look in Ayurveda at doshas kind of pushing each other. Vata is the only dosha that it can actually move, but we can have vata pushing pitta or pushing kapha. And so when there's this imbalance that shows up, it's often because vata is pushing something. And pitta and kapha cannot move on their own. They can't go anywhere. They can burn. Pitta can get inflamed, but it can't go anywhere without vata. Anyway, so thinking about that, like you and that description that you gave of the type 3 it sounds like a pitta vata influenced heart.
It's true.
Like,
I hadn't thought of it that way.
But it does sound like
wait, say that again. It's a pitta
vata influenced heart.
This is deep.
Energy.
So what do you mean by that? I think that's really hitting me as resonant, but what do you mean by that?
So you described, I don't know if these were your exact words, but you described the 3 as being really organized, right? Like,
well, they're sort of like into forward momentum, like the doer. Like organizer is one of the words. Yeah. Leader. Yeah.
So that's very pitta. And then the fear is very vata.
Fascinating. Wow. Yeah. I think this is really, I mean, isn't it so great when you've had a question forever? Like, in real time, it's being answered. And I hope this is helpful. I think we're just making up, like, how do you use these modalities?
Right. We haven't had this conversation before.
Yeah. And we're using ourselves as case studies because we don't want to do this on anyone else because we're just experimenting. But so from an Enneagram perspective, I was talking about those 3 centers of intelligence and overutilizing one, underutilizing another. Well, interestingly, type 3s, this is also true of 9s and 6s in different ways. Type 3s overutilize the heart, but they also underutilize the heart. And when I learned that, I was like, oh my God, so helpful. So it's like overusing the heart in this, maybe in the pitta vata ways that are kind of like using the heart skills of being able to kind of read a room and evaluate people's energetics and emotions, but rather than using that and like feeling your own authenticity and sort of showing up and participating in that, it like invokes this, when the type pattern is running the show, this kind of shape shifting of like, what do they need me to be? And I'm going to be that so that I can like move this forward, or so our goals can be met. So it's all kind of heady, and it is sort of like forward momentum at all costs. And the other side of actually using the kind of underutilized center of really getting into the heart is this more juicy, it's rooted in being. And it's this more juicy, presence filled. I think it's a little bit more humble. And there is more of this innate equilibrium, like just being part of the ecosystem and like playing your part and then like dropping back and enjoy, and also receiving, because that's a heart function too. And I think when I was in my type structure, I only thought about what I could do and learning. And then the next phase was doing a lot of work on all this like shame that I've been trying not to feel for years. But at some point it switched. And I was like, oh, joy can be my teacher. And joy is a very heartful emotion, but it was like a totally different experience of heart than, I'm not because I hadn't had moments of joy, but it was like as an anchor, it was such a different orientation. So yes. So this idea of using the heart in different ways and really getting to the deeper expression without all of that constriction. I think that's really, I think we're I think we're onto something here.
We could start doing collective consultations for people.
Well, I'm all about efficiency, which is kind of also one of the type 3 patterns. But when we're growing, it's just edgy and it's uncomfortable, and I mean, there's intelligence in that, but also I think sometimes we get stuck in that, and especially because for many people, it's like the containers of growth are not around us. We live in a dominant culture that's so paltry on talking about the matters of the inner life. So I love the idea of like supercharging these growth containers for people. So it's like, let's bring the best of what we've got. And then people are always like listening through their own truth chimes. Like, okay, what of this ancient tradition is like helping me understand and befriend myself, and find the freedom to make choices in each moment, which is the whole point. So I think it could be like a very powerful allyship to have both.
Yes. And I love that you just said what's helping me to befriend myself. I mean, that's really what it's all about, is to stop, feeling like we're wrong or defective, or, that we're not okay. It really is about, once we understand, I mean, I feel like dosha is really helpful in this. Enneagram is really helpful in this, is to be able to be like, oh, this is how it's the owner's manual. I talk about that a lot. It's like the owner's manual we never got, of like how to be in this world with this body, mind, and spirit. Right. So yeah. And we're at time.
Yes, we are. We got lost.
We just a whole half hour. And I'll just share that I'm a type 1 Enneagram, which is the title that I know is the reformer.
Oh yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. So and it took me a while to figure out that actually that's what I am. I used to think I was a 6 or I was told when I was a teenager that I was a 6 by somebody, and I was like,
no one else can tell you your Enneagram.
Right.
Yeah, but people do try to. Yeah.
But yeah, the 1 definitely resonates with me, and then I have the wings, and so I'm curious, will you do you want to go into that real quick?
I have some more time if you want to do you as the case study, but
okay, let's just go. People can leave if they need to.
Okay.
But yeah, so I'm Vata predominant, Pitta secondary, and I am an Enneagram type 1.
Okay, Vata predominant, Pitta secondarily, and you're an Enneagram type 1. Okay. So interesting. Okay. Well, what's occurring to me is that people who identify as type 1s, well, I have heard from other type 1s that it's not the easiest. I don't know, I don't know if any type is easy to land in or not, but one thing that can keep people who lead with type 1 from identifying themselves as type 1, a couple of things. Sometimes they think they're a head type because 1s tend to have a lot going on up here. Also, there's this impulse to not want to feel the anger because like a good person does not feel angry. So there's this sort of shoulding and moralizing of it's almost like there's this ideal of what a person should be. And there's this attempt to like be that person rather than to just like be with the messy body and the feelings and the imperfection. Yes. And of course, what we push away just gets bigger and all of that. So yes, I'm also thinking about people who lead with type 1 have really big, beautiful hearts. But I think that accessing of that comes when, like, if the kapha energy, if the body energy is being suppressed, then it can't flow and be the foundation that it's supposed to be. And interestingly, people who lead with this type are often crazy intuitive. Like, I have a friend, I mean, it's just like, what? How do you know that? It's kind of fun to be with her. So but it's learning how to access that like gut center, kind of like we're talking about with the heart, from the good and not the shadow side. Yeah. And also then all the thinking and all the capacities, because 1s are also really good, like cool under pressure. and like able to, so there's like this capacity up here, but it's like it comes under the service of the maybe the gut knowing rather than intention with or over identified, because it's kind of safer, especially in a culture that values this, to be like, I'm super smart and I'm just going to live over here, and actually I have like all these roiling emotions and gut stuff happening. So those are just a few thoughts I have on how the two could play together.
Yeah, that feels very, very true. Yeah, it feels like a type where there's a lot of kind of conflicting things. And yeah, it's I feel like I've lived probably most of my life with lots and lots of Vata imbalance, and as I've healed the Vata imbalance, I've become more Pitta, and that aligns with that center, intelligence center too.
Yeah, it's like everything gets easier because you can just be with like the intelligence that you have more naturally,
right?
And not have to fight so hard to try to be something different.
Yeah, or be like sinking my own ship because of my imbalances that I don't know how to how to take care of, but knowing how to take care of them, then it's like, okay, I can be like, it's what I talk about, like learning your own superpowers, you know, with Ayurveda. It's like, yeah, and you have that with Enneagram too. So yeah, that was super fun. I hope this was helpful for people watching.
Hope this was helpful for people too. I'd love to hear questions.
Yeah, send in your questions. Courtney's in our group. And if you want to share some resources, that would be great for people. And even if they wanted to talk with you too.
Yes, I would love all of the above. So my website is CourtneyPinkerton.com. You see my name on the screen. So, and I have as a gift a digital copy of my book that's available on my website. So I think the actual URL is just CourtneyPinkerton.com/free book. And there's a chapter in here, I mean, the whole thing is Enneagram informed, but chapter 4 has what I call my quick soak method of 3 questions. So it's, helps you figure out at least a starting point for your type, and then some really beautiful descriptions of the type. And also I like, there's field work, like your next step, and also for each type, and a celebration of the qualities of essence. So this deeper, because sometimes people hear their type and they see what's wrong with it, or it just kind of lands as a heady thing and isn't actually useful in real life. So I like to root it in, like you were saying, superpowers. If you've all got, and if you just kind of know what's alive, that's always going to be alive in you. And it's about kind of a journey of clearing out what's getting in the way of those essence qualities coming through. So that's a great next step. And also people can send me an email and reach out to me. There's an option to book a free one-on-one, just kind of conversation call. I always love to nerd out about the Enneagram. And I can tell you I have private coaching. And then I also, one thing I haven't mentioned, I'm really interested in nature-based sort of coaching. And so I have a brand new coaching program that's called Sunshine in a Bottle. And it's got all of the nature-based, and I also combine it with the Enneagram. So I have your plant allies, your herbal plant allies for each type. And I also talk about the Enneagram and the elements. So like fire, water, earth, and air, and how those play together. And you can use those to bring yourself into more balance. So if you're interested in the nature-based stuff, then you can find more info about Sunshine in a Bottle on my website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This is so fun.
So fun.
So go investigate your Enneagram, everybody. Put it together with what you know about your dosha, and you can experience more fulfillment, joy, ease in your life.
And let us know what happens.
Yes, let us know. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here and diving into this conversation. And I hope it's been really helpful for those of you watching. Maybe we'll just have to have Courtney back another time. We'll just keep going with these conversations. Let us know what you would like to see. All right,
Yes.
Courtney, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Hannah. Great to see you.
You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Bye.